a kingdom of sin and shadows. Alessia DeSantis had never believed in love, not in a world where marriages were arranged like business deals. But when her father was murdered, when she was forced into a marriage that felt more like a cage, she realized something brutal. This was not a wedding. This was a sentence. Marcello Ricci smirked, his fingers ghosting over her pulse. "You need a husband," he murmured. "And lucky for you, I don't mind playing the villain." Chapter 1. The Scent of Lilacs and Blood. The air in the garden was thick with the cloying sweetness of lilacs, a scent Alessia DeSantis had always associated with her mother, with happier times, before the world had revealed its jagged edges. Now, that same fragrance was tainted, irrevocably, with the metallic tang of blood. It clung to everything, a suffocating reminder of the night her life had shattered. She knelt beside the shattered fountain, the cold marble seeping through the thin fabric of her black dress. The water, once crystalline, was now a murky red, reflecting the overcast sky like a distorted mirror of her own grief. Her father, Don Antonio DeSantis, had lain here just hours ago, his lifeblood staining the meticulously manicured lawn. The image was seared into her mind, a grotesque tableau of violence and loss. Alessia's fingers, usually adorned with delicate rings, were now bare and trembling. She dipped them into the water, the chills shocking her system, grounding her in the horrifying reality. Her father, a man who had commanded respect and fear in equal measure, had been reduced to this. A cold body, a silent testament to the brutal world he had inhabited, the world she was now irrevocably bound to. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure his voice, his gruff laughter, the way he used to smooth her hair when she was a child, terrified of the thunderstorms that rattled their ancient villa. But all she could hear was the echo of gunshots, the frantic shouts of her family's guards, the sickening thud of his body hitting the ground. "Alessia." The voice was low, laced with a forced gentleness that grated on her raw nerves. She didn't need to look up to know who it was. Marcello Ricci, the man who, in a few short hours, would become her husband. The man her father had chosen, in his final, desperate act, to protect her, to secure the DeSantis family's future. A future Alessia no longer recognized, no longer wanted. She straightened, slowly, wiping her hands on her dress, leaving streaks of crimson on the black fabric. Marcello stood a few feet away, his dark eyes unreadable in the fading light. He was imposing, a figure carved from shadows and sharp angles. His tailored suit, impeccably black, seemed to absorb the remaining light, making him appear even more formidable. He was handsome, undeniably so, with a cruel beauty that both attracted and repelled. "They've taken him away," he said, his voice devoid of any real emotion. It was a statement of fact, not an offer of comfort. Alessia nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears. She wouldn't cry. Not in front of him. Not in front of anyone. Her father had taught her that tears were a weakness, a vulnerability to be exploited. In their world, weakness was a death sentence. "The arrangements have been made," Marcello continued, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing, calculating. "The ceremony will be tonight. A small affair," considering he trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. "Considering your father was murdered just hours ago." Alessia felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, cutting through the numbness that had enveloped her. "A small affair?" she repeated, her voice trembling with barely suppressed fury. "My father is dead, and you speak of a small affair?" Marcello's expression didn't change. He simply inclined his head, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both arrogance and a strange sort of understanding. "It's what he would have wanted, Alessia. A swift transition. No room for our enemies to exploit our grief." "Our enemies?" Alessia laughed, a hollow, broken sound. "And who are our enemies, Marcello? The ones who killed my father? Or the ones who stand here, offering me a gilded cage in exchange for my freedom?" His jaw tightened, a flicker of something that might have been anger crossing his face. "You need protection, Alessia. The DeSantis family is vulnerable. Your father knew that. That's why he made this arrangement. Protection? She spat the word out like a curse. This isn't protection, Marcelo. This is a takeover. A calculated move to consolidate power. And I am nothing more than a pawn in your game. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming, the scent of his expensive cologne mixing with the lingering smell of blood and lilacs. You misunderstand, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I don't need to take over what is already mine. By law, by tradition, the DeSantis holdings now fall under my control. This marriage, it merely formalizes what is already a fact. Alessia stared at him, her heart a cold knot in her chest. She had known, of course, that this marriage was not about love. It was about power, about alliances, about survival. But to hear it spoken so plainly, so coldly, stripped away any lingering illusions she might have harbored. You disgust me, she whispered, the words raw with hatred. A ghost of a smile played on his lips. Perhaps, he conceded. But you will learn, Alessia, that disgust is a small price to pay for survival. And in this world, survival is all that matters. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a gentle touch, not comforting. It was possessive, a claim. You need a husband, he murmured, his eyes locking with hers, a dark promise swirling within their depths. And lucky for you, I don't mind playing the villain. She flinched away from his touch, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. She wanted to scream, to fight, to claw her way out of this nightmare. But she knew it was futile. She was trapped, bound by duty, by tradition, by the blood that now stained her hands. As darkness fell, cloaking the garden in an oppressive silence, Alessia DeSantis walked towards the villa, towards the makeshift altar that had been erected in the grand ballroom. She walked towards her fate, towards a marriage that felt more like a prison sentence than a sacred vow. The scent of lilacs followed her, a haunting reminder of everything she had lost and everything she was about to lose. The only question that remained was whether she would lose herself completely in the process. She had a feeling she was about to meet a side of herself that has been dormant, hidden yet waiting. Chapter 2. A Cage of Gilded Promises. The grand ballroom, usually a scene of lavish parties and boisterous celebrations, was now draped in somber hues of black and deep purple. The crystal chandeliers, usually blazing with light, were dimmed, casting long, dancing shadows across the marble floor. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and the hushed whispers of the assembled guests, a mix of family members, allies, and those who had come to pay their respects, or perhaps, to assess the new balance of power. Alessia moved through the room like a ghost, her black dress blending seamlessly with the mournful atmosphere. She felt numb, detached from the reality unfolding around her. It was as if she were watching a play, a tragic drama in which she was both the protagonist and a helpless spectator. The altar, hastily constructed at the far end of the room, was adorned with black roses and flickering candles. A priest, his face etched with a mixture of sympathy and apprehension, stood waiting. He was a family priest, one who had baptized Alessia, confirmed her, and now would bind her in marriage to a man she barely knew, a man she feared. She caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd. Her Aunt Isabella, her father's sister, her face pale and drawn with grief, her eyes red-rimmed from weeping. Isabella had always been a source of comfort, a gentle presence in Alessia's often turbulent life. But now, even Isabella seemed distant, lost in her own sorrow. There were other faces, too, ones that Alessia recognized from the endless stream of meetings and negotiations that had filled her father's life. Men with hard eyes and calculating smiles, men who spoke in coded phrases and veiled threats. They were the famiglia, the extended network of allies and rivals that made up the intricate web of the Mafia. They were here to witness the transfer of power, to ensure that the DeSantis legacy remained intact, even in death. And then there was Marcelo. He stood at the altar, a dark, imposing figure, his presence radiating an aura of controlled power. He was watching her, his gaze unwavering, a mixture of challenge and something else, something she couldn't quite decipher, lurking in the depths of his eyes. As she approached, he extended his hand, a silent offer, a demand. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. The point of no return. The moment she would relinquish her freedom, her future, her very identity. She placed her hand in his, the contact sending a jolt of electricity through her. His grip was firm, possessive, a physical manifestation of the vows they were about to exchange. She felt a tremor run through her, a mixture of fear and a strange, unsettling anticipation. The priest began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the silent room. The words, ancient and solemn, seemed to carry a weight that pressed down on Alessia, suffocating her. She heard the vows, the promises of love and fidelity, but they felt hollow, meaningless in this context. This wasn't a marriage of love, it was a contract, a binding agreement forged in blood and sealed with a kiss. She repeated the vows, her voice barely a whisper, her throat constricted with emotion. She felt Marcello's gaze on her, intense and unwavering, as if he were trying to see into her soul, to gauge her commitment, her obedience. When the moment came for the exchange of rings, she felt a surge of panic. The ring, a heavy gold band encrusted with diamonds, felt like a shackle, a symbol of her captivity. Marcello slid it onto her finger, his touch lingering for a moment longer than necessary, a subtle reminder of his ownership. She, in turn, placed a similar ring on his finger, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of his skin. It was a strange, intimate act performed in front of a crowd of strangers, yet devoid of any genuine intimacy. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the priest declared, his voice ringing with finality. Marcello leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a brief, possessive kiss that sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a passionate kiss, not a loving one. It was a seal, a mark of ownership, a declaration to the world that Alessia DeSantis was now Alessia Ricci, the property of the Ricci family. The silence in the room was broken by a smattering of applause, a polite acknowledgement of the union. Alessia felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She wanted to scream, to run, to tear off the ring and the dress and escape this suffocating reality. But she knew she couldn't. She was trapped. Marcello kept his arm around her waist, a possessive gesture that both reassured and terrified her. He guided her through the crowd, accepting congratulations, acknowledging condolences, his demeanor calm and controlled. He was the perfect picture of the grieving widower, the strong, capable leader taking the reins of a fractured family. Alessia, on the other hand, felt like an imposter, a puppet in a macabre play. She forced a smile, murmured polite responses, but her mind was racing, searching for an escape, a way out of this gilded cage. As the evening wore on, she found herself increasingly drawn to the edges of the room, seeking refuge in the shadows. She watched the guests, the interactions, the subtle power plays that unfolded beneath the veneer of civility. She saw the fear in some eyes, the ambition in others, the unspoken alliances and rivalries that simmered beneath the surface. She realized, with a growing sense of dread, that this was her life now. This world of secrets and lies, of violence and betrayal, was her inheritance. She was no longer just Alessia DeSantis, the daughter of a powerful Don. She was Alessia Ricci, the wife of an even more powerful one. And she had no idea how to navigate this treacherous landscape, how to survive in a world where trust was a luxury and love was a weakness. She wondered if her father had truly understood what kind of life he was passing down to her. Had he known the price of the choices he had made? Or maybe that's what terrified her most. That he had known, and it hadn't mattered. Chapter 3. The Devil's Bargain. The honeymoon suite, a lavishly appointed room overlooking the moonlit Tyrrhenian Sea, felt more like a prison cell than a romantic retreat. Alessia stood by the window, the cool night air a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the villa. The waves crashed against the shore below, a rhythmic, relentless sound that mirrored the turmoil within her. Marcello had left her alone, ostensibly to attend to business, a euphemism she had already learned to associate with the shadowy dealings of the Mafia. She was grateful for the solitude, for the chance to breathe, to think, to try to make sense of the whirlwind of events that had swept her into this new, terrifying reality. She unwrapped the heavy diamond necklace Marcello had given her as a wedding gift, the cold stones feeling like ice against her skin. It was a beautiful piece, undoubtedly worth a fortune, but it felt like a chain, a symbol of her captivity. She placed it on the ornate dressing table, next to the silver-framed photograph of her father. She picked up the photograph, her fingers tracing the familiar lines of his face. He looked younger in the picture, his eyes less weary, his smile less guarded. She remembered the day it was taken, a rare family outing to the beach, a fleeting moment of normalcy in their otherwise complicated lives. "Papa," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "What have you done?" She knew, of course, what he had done. He had tried to protect her, to secure her future, in the only way he knew how. But in doing so, he had condemned her to a life she didn't want, a life she feared. She thought of her mother, Isabella, who had died when Alessia was just a child. Her mother had been a gentle soul, ill-suited to the harsh realities of the Mafia world. She had retreated into herself, finding solace in her garden, in her books, in her quiet moments with Alessia. She had died young, of a broken heart, as the family euphemistically put it. Alessia suspected it was more than that. She suspected her mother had simply given up, unable to cope with the darkness that surrounded them. Alessia was determined not to follow the same path. She wouldn't retreat, she wouldn't surrender. She would find a way to survive, to carve out a space for herself in this new world, even if it meant playing the game, learning the rules, and using them to her advantage. A sudden noise startled her. She turned to see Marcello standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He had changed out of his formal suit and into a dark silk robe, which did little to soften his imposing presence. "I didn't hear you come in," she said, her voice betraying her nervousness. He moved into the room, his movements fluid and graceful, like a predator stalking its prey. "You seemed lost in thought," he said, his gaze sweeping over her, taking in her disheveled appearance, the tear stains on her cheeks. "I was thinking about my father," she replied, her voice steadier now. He nodded, a flicker of something that might have been understanding crossing his face. "He was a good man," he said, the words sounding surprisingly sincere. "A strong leader. He made difficult choices, but he always did what he believed was best for his family." "And was marrying me off to you one of those difficult choices?" Alessia asked, her voice laced with bitterness. Marcello's expression hardened.
"It was a necessary choice," he said. "A stratégique alliance.
"One that will benefit both our families." "And what about me?" Alessia challenged. "What about what I want? Does that matter at all?" He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming, the scent of his cologne filling the room. "You will learn, Alessia, that in our world, what we want is often secondary to what we need. And right now, you need me. You need my protection, my guidance, my strength." "I don't need a protector, Marcello," Alessia retorted. "I need a partner. Someone who respects me, who treats me as an equal, not a possession." A ghost of a smile played on his lips. "You have a fire in you, Alessia," he said. "I admire that. But fire can be dangerous. It can burn you, consume you if you don't learn to control it." "And you think you can control me?" she asked, her voice rising. He reached out, his fingers brushing against her cheek, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down her spine. "I don't want to control you, Alessia," he said, his voice low and husky. "I want to understand you. I want to earn your trust, your respect. Perhaps," even he trailed off, his eyes locking with hers, a dark intensity burning within them. Alessia felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. She was drawn to him, repelled by him, all at the same time. He was dangerous, she knew that. But there was also something compelling about him, something that hinted at a depth of emotion, a vulnerability that he kept carefully hidden. "Perhaps what, Marcelo?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "Perhaps even your love," he murmured. The words hung in the air, a challenge, a promise, a threat. Alessia knew that this was a devil's bargain. She was playing with fire, dancing with danger. But she also knew that she had no choice. She was in this now, for better or for worse. And she would do whatever it took to survive, even if it meant playing his game, even if it meant risking her heart in the process. The thought was jarring. Could she possibly fall in love with a man like Marcelo? No, absolutely not. But another, quieter voice was beginning to make itself known. What if? Chapter 4. Whispers in the Shadows. The days that followed settled into an unsettling routine. Alessia found herself adrift in the vast, echoing halls of the Ricci villa, a stranger in a strange land. The staff, a mix of long-serving retainers and fiercely loyal guards, treated her with a cautious deference, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They were Marcelo's people, bound to him by ties of loyalty and fear. Alessia was an outsider, an intruder, a potential threat. She spent her mornings exploring the villa and its sprawling grounds, trying to familiarize herself with her new surroundings. The villa was a fortress, a testament to the Ricci family's power and wealth. It was filled with priceless art, antique furniture, and hidden passages, secrets whispered within its ancient walls. The gardens, meticulously manicured and bursting with vibrant colors, offered a temporary escape from the oppressive atmosphere of the house. Alessia would often find herself wandering among the rose bushes, the fragrant blooms a reminder of her mother's garden, a fleeting connection to a happier past. But even in the beauty of the gardens, she couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, of being constantly under surveillance. The guards, ever present, their eyes following her every move, were a constant reminder of her captivity. Her afternoons were usually spent in the library, a vast, dimly lit room filled with leather-bound books and ancient manuscripts. She found solace in the silence, in the company of the silent authors, their words offering a temporary escape from the reality of her situation. She discovered a hidden alcove behind a towering bookcase, a secret sanctuary where she could retreat and read, undisturbed. It was here that she began to delve into the history of the Ricci family, poring over old journals and letters, trying to understand the intricate web of alliances and rivalries that had shaped their destiny. She learned of generations of Riccis, of their rise to power, their ruthless ambition, their unwavering loyalty to the famiglia. She learned of their enemies, of the bloody feuds that had spanned decades, of the betrayals and sacrifices that had marked their path. She also discovered hints of a darker side, of secrets whispered in the shadows, of unexplained deaths, of missing persons, of rumors of a hidden treasure, a legacy buried somewhere within the villa's walls. The evenings were the most difficult. Marcelo would return from his business, his presence filling the villa with a palpable tension. He would often invite her to join him for dinner, a formal affair served in the grand dining room, under the watchful eyes of the staff. Their conversations were strained, filled with unspoken undercurrents. Marcelo would speak of his work, of the challenges of managing the family's vast empire, of the constant threat of rivals and law enforcement. He would ask about her day, her interests, her opinions, but his questions felt more like interrogations than genuine inquiries. Alessia would answer cautiously, carefully guarding her thoughts and emotions. She was learning to play the game, to present a facade of compliance, while secretly searching for a way to gain an advantage, to find a weakness in Marcelo's seemingly impenetrable armor. One evening, as they were dining, Marcelo mentioned a name that Alessia had come across in her research, Giovanni Bellini. Bellini had been a close associate of Marcelo's father, a trusted advisor, who had mysteriously disappeared several years earlier. What happened to Bellini? Alessia asked, trying to sound casual, as if it were a matter of mere curiosity. Marcelo's expression darkened. He betrayed us, he said, his voice cold and hard. He was a traitor.
He paid the price.
Alessia felt a chill run down her spine. She knew what paid the price meant in their world. It meant death, a swift and brutal end. What did he do? She persisted, her curiosity overcoming her fear. Marcello hesitated, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing her reaction. He was working with our enemies, he said. He was trying to undermine our family, to steal our secrets. And you killed him? Alessia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marcello's eyes locked with hers, a dark intensity burning within them. He made his choice, he said. He knew the consequences. Alessia felt a surge of revulsion, a mixture of fear and disgust. She was living with a killer, a man who had no qualms about taking a life, about enforcing the brutal code of the Mafia. But she also felt a strange sense of admiration, a grudging respect for his ruthlessness, his unwavering loyalty to his family. She was beginning to understand the rules of this world, the brutal logic that governed their lives. As she lay in bed that night, listening to the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, she thought about Bellini, about his betrayal, about his death. She wondered if there was more to the story, if there were secrets that Marcello was keeping from her. She knew that she was walking a dangerous path, that she was playing with fire. But she was also determined to uncover the truth, to understand the dark undercurrents that flowed beneath the surface of this seemingly glamorous world. She was determined to find her place, to find her power, even if it meant delving into the whispers and the shadows. She was realizing her naivete, that there may be more to this world than she had seen from her father's protective vantage point. She had heard the whispers, had seen them her whole life, but had never truly listened to them. Until now. Chapter 5. Beneath the surface of silence. The silence of the Ricci villa was a deceptive thing. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a tranquil home, it was a heavy, oppressive silence, pregnant with unspoken secrets and hidden tensions. Alessia found herself increasingly attuned to the nuances of this silence, to the subtle shifts in atmosphere, the unspoken communications that flowed beneath the surface of everyday life. She began to notice the small details, the things that others might overlook. The way the staff exchanged glances when Marcello's name was mentioned, the hushed conversations that ceased abruptly when she entered a room, the way the guards tightened their grip on their weapons whenever a stranger approached the villa. She realized that the silence was a language in itself, a code used to conceal information, to protect the family's secrets. And she was determined to learn this language, to decipher the hidden messages that were being communicated all around her. She started spending more time observing the people who inhabited the villa, studying their interactions, their routines, their relationships. She learned to distinguish between the different factions within the staff, the old guard who had served Marcello's father, and the younger, more ambitious men who were loyal to Marcello himself. She noticed that Isabella, Marcello's aunt, seemed to be increasingly isolated, spending most of her time in her rooms, rarely venturing out. Alessia had tried to reach out to her, to offer comfort, but Isabella had rebuffed her attempts, her eyes filled with a mixture of grief and suspicion. Alessia suspected that Isabella knew more than she was letting on, that she was privy to secrets that could shed light on the family's history, on Marcello's past. But she also knew that Isabella was wary of her, that she saw her as an outsider, a potential threat. One afternoon, Alessia found Isabella in the garden, tending to a small patch of herbs. Isabella had always had a green thumb, a gift for nurturing plants, a skill that Alessia had always admired. "These are beautiful," Alessia said, gesturing to the fragrant herbs. "My mother used to grow herbs, too. She said they had healing properties." Isabella looked up, her expression guarded. "They do," she said. "But they can also be poisonous, if used incorrectly." Alessia sensed an underlying message in Isabella's words, a warning, perhaps. "Like secrets," Alessia said, her voice soft. "They can heal, or they can destroy." Isabella's eyes met hers, a flicker of something that might have been understanding crossing her face. "Secrets are a burden, Alessia," she said. "They weigh heavily on the soul. Sometimes, it's best to let them go." "But what if those secrets are dangerous?" Alessia asked. "What if they could hurt someone?" Isabella sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Then you must be careful, Alessia," she said. "You must choose your battles wisely. Some secrets are best left buried." Alessia knew that Isabella was right. She was walking a dangerous path, digging into the past, uncovering truths that might be better left undisturbed. But she couldn't help herself. She was driven by a need to understand, to make sense of the world she had been thrust into. That evening, Alessia found herself drawn back to the library, to the hidden alcove behind the bookcase. She had discovered a small, locked box hidden among the old journals, a box that she suspected contained more than just dusty papers. She had tried to open it, but the lock was intricate, resistant to her efforts. She needed a key, or perhaps a skilled hand. She thought of Marco, one of the younger guards, a man who had shown her a flicker of kindness, a hint of sympathy. He was skilled with his hands, she had noticed, always tinkering with small mechanisms, repairing broken objects. She decided to take a risk, to approach him, to ask for his help. She knew it was a dangerous gamble, that she was putting her trust in someone who might betray her. But she had a gut feeling about Marco, a sense that he was different from the others, that he might be willing to help her. The villa seemed so full of people, yet Alessia had never felt so lonely. This was a desperate gambit for human connection, as much as it was one to unlock literal secrets. She found him in the courtyard, polishing his motorcycle, a vintage model that he clearly cherished. "Marco," she said, her voice hesitant. "I need your help." He looked up, surprised, his eyes meeting hers. "Signora Ricci," he said, his voice respectful. "What can I do for you?" Alessia explained about the box, about the lock, about her desire to uncover its secrets. She watched his face carefully, gauging his reaction, searching for any sign of hesitation, of betrayal. Marco listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "It's a risk, Signora," he said. "If Don Ricci found out, I know," Alessia said. "But I have to try. I have to understand." Marco hesitated for a moment, his gaze sweeping over her, assessing her sincerity. "All right," he said, his voice low. "I'll help you. But we have to be careful. We have to do it in secret." Alessia felt a surge of relief, a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had surrounded her. She had found an ally, someone who was willing to take a risk, to help her uncover the truth. But she also knew that this was just the beginning, that the path ahead was fraught with danger. The silence, she was beginning to realize, was about to be broken, and the consequences could be deadly. She had a feeling that she was about to begin to peel back the layers of deception that went deeper than she had ever imagined. Chapter 6. The Price of Defiance. The meeting was arranged under the cloak of darkness, in the hidden alcove of the library. Alessia and Marco huddled together, the only light source a small, flickering candle that cast long, dancing shadows across the ancient books. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, a musty aroma that heightened the sense of secrecy and danger. Marco carefully examined the locked box, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings, his eyes assessing the mechanism. He produced a small set of tools from his pocket, a collection of picks and wires that he had clearly used before. "This is an old lock," he said, his voice low and focused. "But I think I can open it." Alessia watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. She was nervous, excited, terrified. She knew that what they were doing was a betrayal, a defiance of Marcello's authority. If they were caught, the consequences would be severe. But she also felt a sense of exhilaration, a thrill of rebellion. She was taking control, defying the rules, challenging the system that had sought to confine her. Marco worked silently, his movements precise and deliberate. The only sound was the soft clicking of the tools, the occasional rustle of paper, the frantic beat of Alessia's heart. After what seemed like an eternity, there was a final click, a soft snap, and the lock sprang open. Marco looked up, a triumphant smile on his face. "Done," he said. Alessia felt a surge of relief, mixed with a growing sense of anticipation. She reached for the box, her fingers trembling. She lifted the lid, revealing the contents within. It wasn't what she had expected. There were no jewels, no money, no hidden treasures. Instead, There were letters, stacks of them, bound together with faded ribbons. There were also photographs, old and faded, depicting people Alessia didn't recognize. She picked up one of the letters, her eyes scanning the elegant script. It was written in Italian, a language Alessia was fluent in, thanks to her mother's insistence on preserving their heritage. The letter was dated many years ago, addressed to Giovanni Bellini, the man who had mysteriously disappeared. It was from a woman named Sofia. As Alessia read the letter, her heart began to race. It was a love letter, filled with passionate declarations, with promises of a future together, with hints of a secret rendezvous. She picked up another letter, and another, each one revealing more of the story. Sofia and Bellini had been lovers, secretly meeting, planning a life together, away from the constraints of the Mafia world. But then, the letters stopped abruptly. There was a final, frantic note from Sofia, expressing her fear, her desperation. She had discovered something dangerous, something that threatened to expose a dark secret within the Ricci family. Alessia felt a chill run down her spine. She realized that Bellini hadn't just betrayed Marcello's father, he had been involved in something far more complex, far more dangerous. And Sofia, his lover, had been caught in the crossfire. She looked at the photographs, studying the faces, searching for clues. One photograph caught her attention. It was a picture of Sofia, standing next to a man Alessia recognized. It was Marcello's father, Don Lorenzo Ricci. But there was something else, something subtle, in the way they were standing, in the way they were looking at each other. It was a look of intimacy, of affection, of something more than just friendship. Alessia gasped, her mind reeling. She realized the truth, the horrifying secret that had been buried for years. Sofia hadn't just been Bellini's lover, she had also been involved with Lorenzo Ricci. And Bellini's disappearance, it hadn't been a simple case of betrayal. It had been a cover-up, a desperate attempt to protect the family's reputation, to conceal a scandal that could have destroyed them. Suddenly, a noise from behind startled her. She turned to see Marcello standing in the doorway, his expression a mask of fury. He had caught them. "What is going on here?" he demanded, his voice ice cold. Alessia and Marco froze, their eyes wide with fear. They were trapped, exposed, their defiance revealed. Marcello strode into the alcove, his gaze sweeping over the open box, the scattered letters, the photographs. He picked up the picture of Sofia and his father, his face darkening with rage. "You were snooping," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Digging into things that don't concern you." Alessia tried to speak, to explain, but the words caught in her throat. She was terrified, paralyzed by fear. Marcello turned to Marco, his eyes blazing with fury. "And you," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "You betrayed me. You helped her." Marco stood his ground, his expression defiant.
"She needed help," he said.
"She deserved to know the truth." Marcello's hand shot out, striking Marco across the face, sending him sprawling to the floor. Alessia cried out, her fear turning to anger. "Don't you touch him!" she shouted, stepping in front of Marco, shielding him from Marcello's wrath. Marcello's gaze turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and something else, something that looked like hurt. "You defied me, Alessia," he said. "You broke my trust." "Your trust?" Alessia retorted. "You never trusted me, Marcello. You treated me like a possession, a prisoner. I had to find out the truth for myself." "The truth?" Marcello laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "The truth is that you are my wife, Alessia. You belong to me,
and you will obey me."
He grabbed her arm, his grip tight and painful. Alessia struggled, trying to break free, but he was too strong. "Let me go, Marcello," she pleaded, her voice trembling. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, a flicker of something that might have been regret crossing his face. But then, his expression hardened, his resolve returning. "I will take you somewhere you'll be safe. And then I will return to deal with this traitor." He dragged her out of the library, ignoring her protests, her pleas. Alessia knew that she had crossed a line, that she had pushed him too far. She had challenged his authority, defied his control. And now she would pay the price. She didn't know where he was taking her, but fear seized every nerve in her body. He said safe, but she was terrified what his definition of that word would turn out to mean. Chapter 7. Echoes of a Forgotten Past. Marcello drove them to a secluded villa, nestled high in the hills overlooking the city. It was a smaller, more rustic version of the main Ricci estate, surrounded by olive groves and vineyards, a place that seemed far removed from the dark undercurrents of the Mafia world. The silence between them during the drive had been heavy, suffocating, broken only by the roar of the engine and the occasional sigh from Alessia. She had tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but Marcello had ignored her, his face set in a mask of cold fury. He led her into the villa, his grip on her arm still firm, possessive. The interior was sparsely furnished, with simple, traditional furniture and whitewashed walls. It felt like a place frozen in time, a relic of a bygone era. "This was my grandmother's house," Marcello said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She used to come here to escape, to find peace. It's been empty for years." He released her arm, finally, but his gaze remained fixed on her, assessing, calculating. Alessia rubbed her arm, the skin still tender from his grip. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice trembling.
To keep you safe, he said.
"And to give you time to think, to reflect on your actions." "Safe?" Alessia scoffed. "I'm not safe with you, Marcello. You're the one who's dangerous." He turned away, walking towards the window, looking out at the panoramic view. The city lights twinkled below, a vast, sprawling tapestry of life and activity. "I did what I had to do," he said, his voice low and husky. "To protect my family, to protect my legacy." "By killing Bellini?" Alessia challenged. "By covering up your father's affair?" He turned back to her, his eyes blazing with anger. "You don't understand," he said. "You don't know the whole story." "Then tell me," Alessia pleaded. "Tell me the truth. Let me understand." Marcello hesitated, his gaze searching hers. He seemed to be struggling with himself, wrestling with his emotions. "My father, he wasn't a perfect man," he said, his voice strained. "He made mistakes. He had weaknesses. Sophia, she was one of them." He began to pace the room, his movements restless, agitated. He loved her, he said, but he couldn't be with her. He was married, he had a family, a reputation to uphold. "So he used her," Alessia said, her voice filled with bitterness. "He took what he wanted, and then he discarded her." "It wasn't that simple," Marcello said. "He cared for her. He tried to protect her. But Bellini, he found out. He was jealous, possessive. He threatened to expose them. So your father killed him," Alessia said, her voice trembling. Marcello stopped pacing, his eyes meeting hers. "He didn't order Bellini's death," he said. "That was Bellini who pulled the trigger himself." Alessia's mind stopped, trying to absorb this new information. "But you said I let you believe what you wanted to," he said. He came toward her, placing his hand on hers. "My father loved Bellini like a son. Bellini couldn't handle what he had done. He was overcome with guilt for killing Sophia, and he confessed everything to my father. And then he shot himself, there in my father's study. My father, he was never the same after that." Alessia felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Shock, disbelief, confusion. She had been so sure of Marcello's guilt, of his ruthlessness. But now, she was beginning to see a different picture, a more complex, more nuanced reality. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Marcello reached out, his fingers gently touching her cheek. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "Just listen. Just try to understand." He told her the rest of the story, the details that had been hidden for years. He told her how his father had covered up Bellini's suicide, how he had made it look like a betrayal, a disappearance, to protect his family, to protect his legacy. He told her how he, Marcello, had discovered the truth after his father's death, how he had been forced to carry the burden of the secret, to perpetuate the lie. Alessia listened, her heart aching for Marcello, for his father, for Sophia, for all the lives that had been destroyed by this tragic chain of events. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm golden glow over the hills, Alessia felt a shift within her. The anger, the fear, the resentment that had consumed her began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of understanding, of empathy, of compassion. She looked at Marcello, really looked at him, seeing beyond the mask of the ruthless mafia boss, seeing the vulnerable, wounded man beneath. She realized that he wasn't the monster she had imagined him to be. He was a product of his environment, a victim of his circumstances, trapped in a cycle of violence and betrayal. She reached out, her hand covering his. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice sincere. "I misjudged you." He squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of her apology. "We all make mistakes, Alessia," he said. "The important thing is to learn from them." As they stood there, together, in the quiet solitude of the villa, Alessia felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of a possibility. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a way to move forward, to break free from the echoes of the past, to forge a new future, a future based on honesty, on trust, on love. It wouldn't be easy. The scars of the past ran deep. But for the first time since her father's death, Alessia felt a sense of peace, a sense of purpose. She had a long way to go, but she was no longer alone. She had Marcello, and that, she realized, made all the difference. Chapter 8. Cracks in the facade. Returning to the main Ricci villa felt different this time. The oppressive silence, the watchful eyes of the staff, the constant sense of being under surveillance, all of it remained, but Alessia's perception had shifted. She was no longer an outsider, an intruder, a prisoner. She was still Marcello's wife, bound to him by vows and circumstances, but she was also his confidant, his partner, in a way she hadn't been before. The shared secret, the revelation of his family's past, had created a bond between them, a fragile connection built on honesty and vulnerability. They had spent the night talking, sharing their fears, their hopes, their dreams. Alessia had learned more about Marcello in those few hours than she had in all the weeks of their marriage. She had learned about his childhood, his strained relationship with his father, his early exposure to the violence and brutality of the mafia world. She had learned about his ambitions, his desire to modernize the family business, to move away from the traditional methods of intimidation and coercion. She had also learned about his loneliness, his isolation, his yearning for a connection, for someone who truly understood him, who accepted him for who he was, flaws and all. Marcello, in turn, had learned about Alessia's past, her close relationship with her mother, her sheltered upbringing, her initial reluctance to embrace the mafia lifestyle. He had learned about her intelligence, her determination, her unwavering sense of justice. He had also learned about her fears, her doubts, her anxieties about the future, about the challenges they faced as a couple, as a family. The days that followed were marked by a subtle shift in their relationship. They began to spend more time together, not just at formal dinners or in strained conversations, but in genuine moments of connection. They would take walks in the garden, discuss books in the library, share quiet evenings on the terrace, overlooking the city. Marcello began to involve Alessia in the family business, consulting her on decisions, seeking her advice, valuing her input. He introduced her to his key advisors, his lieutenants, the men who ran the day-to-day operations of the Ricci Empire. Alessia, in turn, began to take a more active role, using her intelligence and her intuition to navigate the complex world of mafia politics. She learned to read the subtle cues, the unspoken communications, the hidden agendas that drove the decisions of the famiglia. She discovered that she had a knack for it, a talent for strategy, for negotiation, for diplomacy. She was able to see through the facades, to identify the weaknesses, to exploit the vulnerabilities of their rivals. But as their relationship deepened, as they grew closer, Alessia began to notice cracks in Marcello's facade, glimpses of the darkness that still lurked beneath the surface. She would catch him staring into space, his expression haunted, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and anger. She would hear him talking on the phone in hushed tones, his voice harsh and commanding, his language laced with threats and intimidation. She would see the way he treated his subordinates, the way he demanded absolute loyalty, the way he punished any sign of dissent. She realized that while he had shared his vulnerabilities with her, he was still capable of ruthlessness, of violence, of brutality. One evening, they had a disagreement, a minor argument over a business decision. Alessia had challenged Marcello's judgment, questioning his methods, suggesting an alternative approach. Marcello had reacted angrily, his temper flaring, his eyes flashing with fury. He had accused her of undermining his authority, of questioning his leadership, of betraying his trust. Alessia had stood her ground, refusing to back down, arguing her case with passion and conviction. She had reminded him of their agreement, of their shared commitment to honesty and transparency. The argument had escalated, their voices rising, their words becoming sharper, more hurtful. Finally, Marcello had stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, leaving Alessia shaken and upset. She had spent the night alone, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. She had wondered if she had made a mistake, if she had pushed him too far, if she had shattered the fragile bond they had built. The next morning, she found him in the garden, tending to the roses, his expression somber, his eyes filled with regret. He apologized for his outburst, admitting that he had overreacted, that he had been stressed, that he had let his emotions get the better of him. Alessia accepted his apology, but she also made it clear that she wouldn't tolerate his temper, that she wouldn't be intimidated by his threats, that she expected him to treat her with respect, as an equal. The incident served as a reminder that their relationship was still a work in progress, that they had a long way to go before they could truly trust each other, before they could fully overcome the challenges they faced. Alessia knew that the cracks in Marcello's facade were a reflection of the world he inhabited, the pressures he faced, the burdens he carried. She knew that he was trying to change, to evolve, to become a better man. But she also knew that change wasn't easy, that it required constant effort, constant vigilance. The old Marcello, the ruthless Don, was always lurking, waiting for a chance to reassert control. The question was which Marcello would win out in the end. Chapter 9. A Glimmer of Hope. Despite the occasional setbacks, the underlying current of Alessia and Marcello's relationship was one of growth and deepening connection. They were learning to navigate the treacherous waters of their world together, relying on each other's strengths, supporting each other's weaknesses. Alessia's influence on Marcello was becoming increasingly evident. He was more open to her suggestions, more willing to consider alternative approaches, less prone to resorting to violence and intimidation. He was starting to see the value of diplomacy, of negotiation, of building alliances rather than crushing enemies. He began to implement changes within the family business, streamlining operations, diversifying investments, moving away from the traditional rackets of extortion and gambling towards more legitimate ventures. He invested in real estate, in technology, in renewable energy, creating a more sustainable and diversified portfolio. He also started to treat his subordinates with more respect, listening to their concerns, valuing their contributions, rewarding their loyalty. He created a more collaborative environment, fostering a sense of teamwork and shared purpose. These changes weren't universally welcomed. There were those within the famiglia, the old guard, who resisted the reforms, who clung to the traditional ways, who saw Marcello's new approach as a sign of weakness. They grumbled in the shadows, whispered their dissent, plotted their resistance. They saw Alessia as a threat, an outsider who was influencing Marcello, leading him astray, undermining the family's power. Alessia was aware of the opposition, of the whispers, of the veiled threats. But she refused to be intimidated. She knew that change was necessary, that the old ways were unsustainable, that the family had to adapt to survive. She continued to advise Marcello, to support his decisions, to challenge his assumptions. She used her intelligence, her intuition, her growing understanding of the Mafia world to help him navigate the complex political landscape. One day, Marcello announced that he wanted to organize a charity event, a gala to raise funds for a local orphanage. It was a bold move, a public display of philanthropy that was unheard of in the Mafia world. The old guard were outraged. They saw it as a waste of money, a sign of weakness, a betrayal of their traditions. They argued that the money should be used to strengthen the family, to buy influence, to eliminate rivals. Marcello stood firm. He argued that the gala would improve the family's image, that it would create goodwill, that it would open doors to new opportunities. He insisted that it was the right thing to do, that it was time for the Ricci family to give back to the community. Alessia supported him wholeheartedly. She helped him organize the event, securing sponsorships, inviting dignitaries, arranging for entertainment, handling the publicity. The gala was a resounding success. It attracted a large crowd, a mix of celebrities, politicians, business leaders, and even some of their rivals. The event raised a significant amount of money for the orphanage, and it generated positive press for the Ricci family. It was a turning point, a moment of triumph for Marcello and Alessia. They had defied the old guard, challenged the traditions, and proven that they could achieve success through a different path. As they stood together on the stage, receiving applause from the crowd, Alessia felt a surge of pride, of accomplishment, of hope. She looked at Marcello, his eyes shining with pride, his smile genuine and warm. She realized that they had come a long way, that they had overcome significant obstacles, that they had built a strong foundation for their future. But she also knew that the challenges were far from over. The old guard were still lurking, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. The rivals were still circling, looking for weaknesses to exploit. The world they inhabited was still dangerous, still treacherous, still filled with secrets and lies. As they left the gala, hand in hand, Alessia felt a sense of both excitement and apprehension. She knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but she was no longer afraid. She had Marcello by her side, and together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. They had a glimmer of hope, a vision of a different future, a future where they could break free from the chains of the past and create a new legacy, a legacy built on love, on trust, on respect. And that, she knew, was worth fighting for. It was the first time she had felt truly optimistic, not only about her and Marcello, but about the family, about the future. Chapter 10. The Unveiling of Secrets. The success of the charity gala had emboldened Marcello, giving him the confidence to push forward with his reforms, to further distance himself from the traditional, brutal methods of the old guard. He continued to diversify the family's business interests, investing in legitimate ventures, creating a more sustainable and diversified portfolio. He also started to clean house, removing corrupt officials, dismantling illegal operations, and severing ties with some of their more unsavory associates. He was determined to transform the Ricci family into a legitimate force, a respected entity in the business world. But his actions had consequences. The old guard, feeling increasingly marginalized and threatened, began to plot against him, secretly colluding with rivals, seeking to undermine his authority and restore the old ways. Alessia, with her growing network of informants and her keen intuition, became aware of the brewing rebellion. She discovered that a group of disgruntled capos, led by a particularly ruthless and ambitious man named Salvatore Rizzo, were planning to overthrow Marcello, to seize control of the family. Rizzo was a formidable opponent, a man with a long history of violence and a reputation for ruthlessness. He had been a close associate of Marcello's father, and he resented Marcello's new approach, his attempts to modernize the family, his reliance on Alessia's counsel. Alessia knew that she had to warn Marcello, to prepare him for the impending threat. But she also knew that she had to be careful, that she couldn't reveal her sources, that she had to protect her informants. She approached Marcello cautiously, sharing her concerns, presenting her evidence, urging him to take action. Marcello listened intently, his expression grave, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and concern. He initially dismissed her warnings, arguing that Rizzo was a loyal soldier, that he would never betray him. He accused Alessia of being paranoid, of overreacting, of letting her fears get the better of her. But Alessia persisted, presenting him with more evidence, more details, more compelling arguments. She showed him intercepted communications, financial records, witness testimonies, all pointing to Rizzo's treachery. Finally, Marcello relented. He realized that Alessia was right, that Rizzo was a threat, that he had to act quickly to protect himself, to protect his family. He called a meeting of his most trusted advisors, his lieutenants, the men who remained loyal to him. He presented them with the evidence, outlining Rizzo's plot, revealing his treachery. The advisors were shocked, outraged, disbelieving. They had known Rizzo for years. They had fought alongside him. They had trusted him. They couldn't believe that he would betray them. But Marcello was adamant. He insisted that Rizzo had to be dealt with, that he had to be eliminated, before he could carry out his plan. The advisors debated the issue, arguing over the best course of action. Some suggested a direct confrontation, a swift and brutal strike. Others proposed a more subtle approach, a carefully orchestrated trap. Alessia, who was present at the meeting, offered a different suggestion. She proposed a plan to expose Rizzo's treachery publicly, to reveal his crimes to the other families, to discredit him in the eyes of the wider Mafia community. She argued that this approach would be more effective, that it would avoid a bloody conflict, that would preserve the family's reputation. Marcello was initially hesitant, reluctant to expose the family's internal divisions to the outside world. But Alessia convinced him, arguing that it was the only way to ensure a lasting peace, to prevent further bloodshed. They worked together, meticulously gathering evidence, preparing their case, building a network of allies who would support them. They reached out to other families, presenting them with proof of Rizzo's treachery, securing their backing. Finally, they were ready. They called a meeting of all the major Mafia families, a grand council where Rizzo's crimes would be revealed, his fate decided. The meeting was held in a neutral location, a heavily guarded villa outside the city. All the major dons were present, along with their lieutenants, their bodyguards, their advisors. Marcello presented the evidence, calmly and methodically, outlining Rizzo's plot, revealing his treachery, exposing his crimes. Rizzo, who was also present, vehemently denied the accusations, claiming that it was a setup, a conspiracy to frame him. But the evidence was overwhelming. The other dons listened intently, their expressions grave, their eyes filled with judgment. They had known Rizzo for years. They had respected him. They had feared him. But now, they saw him for what he truly was, a traitor, a liar, a threat to the stability of their world. In the end, the council voted to condemn Rizzo, to strip him of his rank, to banish him from the Mafia community. It was a devastating blow, a public humiliation, a fate worse than death for a man like Rizzo. As Rizzo was led away, his face contorted with rage and despair, Alessia felt a sense of both relief and sadness. She had helped to avert a bloody conflict, to protect Marcello, to preserve the family's future. But she had also witnessed the brutal reality of the Mafia world, the consequences of betrayal, the price of power. The price of Rizzo's ambition had been far too high, and she had to remember that as she planned her own future. Chapter 11. The Weight of Loyalty. The downfall of Salvatore Rizzo sent shockwaves through the Mafia underworld. It was a clear message from Marcello, a demonstration of his power, his resolve, his willingness to break with tradition to maintain control. It also solidified Alessia's position within the Ricci family, proving her loyalty, her intelligence, and her strategic acumen. The old guard, while still resentful of her influence, were forced to acknowledge her effectiveness. They began to treat her with a grudging respect, recognizing that she was a force to be reckoned with. Marcello, emboldened by his victory, continued to implement his reforms, further modernizing the family business, distancing himself from the illegal activities of the past. He focused on building legitimate enterprises, creating a more sustainable and diversified portfolio. But the Rizzo affair had left a lingering sense of unease, a heightened awareness of the ever-present threat of betrayal. Marcello became more cautious, more guarded, more reliant on Alessia's counsel. He strengthened security, tightened his inner circle, and increased surveillance on his remaining capos. He trusted no one completely, except for Alessia. Their relationship deepened further. their bond strengthened by the shared experience, the mutual trust, the understanding that they were in this together, facing a common enemy. They became inseparable, working side by side, making decisions together, sharing their fears, their hopes, their dreams. But the weight of loyalty, the constant pressure of maintaining control, the ever-present threat of violence, began to take its toll. Marcelo became more withdrawn, more introspective, more prone to bouts of melancholy. Alessia noticed the change in him, the subtle signs of stress, the haunted look in his eyes, the way he would sometimes stare into space, lost in thought. She tried to talk to him, to offer comfort, to share the burden, but he resisted, pushing her away, retreating into himself. She knew that he was struggling, that he was wrestling with his demons, that he was carrying the weight of his family's legacy, the responsibility for their future. One evening, she found him in the library, sitting in the dark, staring at the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked tired, defeated, older than his years. "Marcelo," she said softly, approaching him. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer, didn't even look at her. He just continued to stare into the flames, his expression blank, his eyes devoid of emotion. Alessia sat down beside him, gently taking his hand. His skin was cold, his grip weak. "Talk to me," she pleaded. "Tell me what's bothering you." He finally looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and regret. "I'm tired, Alessia," he said, his voice hoarse. "Tired of the violence, tired of the betrayals, tired of the constant pressure." "I know," she said, squeezing his hand. "It's not easy. But you're not alone. I'm here for you." "I don't know if I can do this anymore," he said. "I don't know if I can keep fighting, keep struggling, keep living in this world." Alessia felt a pang of fear, a surge of anxiety. She had never seen him like this before, so defeated, so hopeless. "You can do this, Marcelo," she said, her voice firm. "You're strong, you're capable, you're a survivor. We'll get through this together." "But at what cost?" he asked. "How many more lives will be lost? How many more betrayals will we endure? How much more blood will be spilled?" Alessia didn't have an answer. She knew that the Mafia world was a brutal, unforgiving place, that violence and betrayal were inherent to its nature. But she also believed that change was possible, that they could create a different future, a future where peace and prosperity were not just empty words. "We can't change the past, Marcelo," she said. "But we can shape the future. We can build a better world, a world where our children won't have to live in fear, where they won't have to carry the burden of our sins." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, a flicker of hope returning to his gaze. "Do you really believe that?" he asked. "I do," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "I believe in you, Marcelo. I believe in us. And I believe that together, we can make a difference." He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a soft, tender kiss that conveyed a depth of emotion, a silent promise of commitment, of love. As they held each other, in the quiet stillness of the library, Alessia felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to fight for their future, to overcome the challenges that lay ahead. She knew that the weight of loyalty would always be there, a constant reminder of the world they inhabited, the responsibilities they carried. But she also knew that they could bear that weight together, that their love, their trust, their shared commitment would give them the strength to persevere. And that, for now, was enough. It had to be, because she didn't know what she would do, who she would be, without him. Chapter 12. A Dance with Danger. Life within the Ricci family settled into a new rhythm, a delicate balance between the old ways and Marcelo's burgeoning reforms. Alessia, now firmly established as his confidant and advisor, found herself increasingly involved in the intricate dance of mafia politics. It was a world of veiled threats, shifting alliances, and constant vigilance, where one wrong step could have deadly consequences. Marcelo, despite his moments of doubt and despair, continued to push for change, driven by Alessia's unwavering belief in him and their shared vision of a different future. He focused on expanding the legitimate aspects of the family business, investing in real estate, technology, and renewable energy, slowly but surely weaning the Ricci Empire off its dependence on illegal activities. This transformation, however, wasn't without its challenges. The remnants of the old guard, though diminished in power after Rizzo's downfall, remained a constant source of tension. They resented Marcello's reforms, viewing them as a betrayal of tradition and a sign of weakness. They whispered their discontent in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim their lost influence. Alessia, with her keen intuition and growing network of informants, was acutely aware of this simmering resentment. She knew that the threat of rebellion was ever present, a sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. She constantly monitored the movements of the disgruntled capos, analyzing their communications, searching for any sign of conspiracy. One evening, while reviewing financial records, Alessia stumbled upon a series of suspicious transactions, large sums of money being transferred to offshore accounts controlled by individuals known to be associated with rival families. It was a clear indication of a potential alliance, a clandestine agreement to undermine Marcello's authority. She immediately brought her findings to Marcello, presenting him with the evidence, outlining her suspicions. Marcello, initially skeptical, was forced to acknowledge the gravity of the situation. He realized that the threat was not just from within, but also from outside, from rival families eager to exploit the internal divisions within the Ricci clan. They decided to take a calculated risk, to confront the situation head-on, but subtly, without revealing their hand too early. They organized a lavish party, a masquerade ball at the Ricci villa, inviting representatives from all the major mafia families, including those they suspected of plotting against them. It was a dangerous game, a dance with danger, where every smile could conceal a dagger, every compliment could be a veiled threat. Alessia and Marcello moved through the crowd, greeting their guests, engaging in polite conversation, all the while carefully observing their interactions, searching for clues, gathering intelligence. Alessia, dressed in an elegant gown and a dazzling mask, found herself the object of much attention. Men, both allies and rivals, flocked to her side, drawn by her beauty, her intelligence, her growing reputation as a power player within the Ricci family. She used this attention to her advantage, skillfully extracting information, subtly probing for weaknesses, gleaning insights into the shifting alliances and hidden agendas of the various factions. She danced with several prominent dons, engaging them in seemingly innocent conversations, all the while carefully steering the discussion towards topics of mutual interest, subtly revealing her knowledge of their dealings, letting them know that she was aware of their secrets. She noticed a pattern, a series of coded messages being exchanged between certain individuals, a subtle network of communication that pointed to a coordinated effort to undermine Marcello's authority. She shared her observations with Marcello, who had been similarly engaged in his own reconnaissance. Together, they pieced together the puzzle, identifying the key players in the conspiracy, uncovering their plan to destabilize the Ricci family and seize control. The plan, they discovered, was to be executed in stages, starting with a series of coordinated attacks on Ricci-controlled businesses, followed by a smear campaign to discredit Marcello in the eyes of the other families, and culminating in a violent coup to overthrow him. Armed with this knowledge, Alessia and Marcello knew they had to act quickly and decisively. They couldn't afford to wait, to let the conspiracy unfold. They had to strike first, to preempt the attack, to neutralize the threat before it could materialize. As the masquerade ball reached its climax, with music swirling and champagne flowing, Alessia and Marcello prepared to make their move, to unmask their enemies, to expose their treachery, to turn the tables on those who sought to destroy them. The night was far from over, and Alessia knew it could very well be the night everything changed one way or another. Chapter 13. The Taste of Betrayal. The masquerade ball continued, a swirling vortex of silk, secrets, and simmering tensions. Alessia and Marcello, having identified the key players in the conspiracy against them, moved with a calculated precision, their every action designed to expose their enemies without revealing their own hand too early. They separated, strategically positioning themselves to observe and interact with the suspected conspirators. Alessia, with her charm and intelligence, continued to engage in seemingly innocent conversations, subtly extracting information, confirming her suspicions, gathering the final pieces of the puzzle. She noticed that several of the Dons, known to be rivals of the Ricci family, were unusually attentive to a particular group of Marcello's capos, men who had previously been loyal, but who had grown increasingly resentful of his reforms. These capos, she realized, were the weak link, the point of entry for the outside influence. She subtly approached one of them, a man named Lorenzo, known for his ambition and his volatile temper. She engaged him in a conversation, flattering his ego, playing on his insecurities, subtly hinting at her own dissatisfaction with Marcello's leadership. Lorenzo, emboldened by her apparent sympathy, began to reveal his true feelings, his resentment towards Marcello, his belief that the family was losing its power, its prestige, its respect. He hinted at a plan, a coordinated effort to restore the old ways, to reclaim the family's former glory. Alessia, feigning agreement, encouraged him to elaborate, to reveal the details of the plot. Lorenzo, increasingly intoxicated by both the champagne and Alessia's attention, began to spill the secrets, unknowingly confirming her suspicions and providing her with the final piece of evidence she needed. Meanwhile, Marcello was engaged in his own subtle maneuvers. He approached the rival Dons, engaging them in seemingly friendly banter, all the while subtly probing their intentions, testing their loyalty, exposing their hidden agendas. He noticed that they were avoiding direct eye contact, their answers evasive, their smiles strained. He sensed their unease, their guilt, their awareness that he was onto them. As the evening progressed, the tension in the room became palpable. The music seemed to grow louder, the laughter more forced, the conversations more guarded. Everyone knew that something was about to happen, that the delicate balance of power was about to shift. At a prearranged signal, Marcello called for silence. The music stopped, the conversation ceased. All eyes turned towards him. He stood on the grand staircase, overlooking the assembled guests, his expression calm, his voice commanding. "My friends," he began, his voice echoing through the silent room. "I have called you here tonight to celebrate our family, our traditions, our shared prosperity. But I have also learned that there are some among us who seek to undermine our unity, to betray our trust, to destroy everything we have built." A gasp went through the crowd. The conspirators, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear, exchanged nervous glances. They knew that they had been exposed, that their plot had been discovered. Marcello continued, his voice growing stronger, his gaze sweeping over the assembled guests. "I have evidence," he said, "irrefutable evidence, of a conspiracy to destabilize our family, to seize control, to plunge us into chaos and bloodshed." He then proceeded to outline the plot, revealing the names of the conspirators, detailing their plans, exposing their treachery. He presented the evidence he and Alessia had gathered, the intercepted communications, the financial records, the witness testimonies. The reaction was swift and decisive. The loyal members of the Ricci family, outraged by the betrayal, turned on the conspirators, their faces filled with anger and disgust. The rival Dons, caught in their own web of deceit, tried to distance themselves, claiming ignorance, feigning innocence. But it was too late. The truth had been revealed, the conspiracy exposed. The masquerade was over. Lorenzo, realizing that he had been played, that Alessia had manipulated him, that he had unwittingly revealed his own guilt, lunged towards her, his hand reaching for a hidden weapon. But Marcello was faster. He intercepted Lorenzo, blocking his attack, disarming him with a swift, brutal move. The two men grappled, their bodies locked in a violent struggle. Alessia, watching in horror, screamed for help. The guards, alerted by the commotion, rushed to intervene, separating the two men, restraining Lorenzo. Marcello, his face bruised, his breathing ragged, stood over Lorenzo, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "You betrayed me," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You betrayed our family." Lorenzo spat on the floor, his expression defiant. "You were weak," he said. You are destroying everything our fathers built. You deserved to be overthrown." Marcello raised his hand, as if to strike Lorenzo, but then he stopped. He looked at Alessia, her face pale with fear, her eyes filled with concern. He lowered his hand, his expression softening. "Take him away," he said to the guards.
"He will be dealt with."
As Lorenzo was dragged away, protesting and cursing, Alessia rushed to Marcello's side, embracing him, her body trembling with relief. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thanks to you." He looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude, with love, with a renewed sense of appreciation for her intelligence, her courage, her unwavering loyalty. The taste of betrayal lingered in the air, a bitter reminder of the ever-present dangers of their world. But amidst the chaos and the violence, a sense of triumph emerged, a victory won through courage, intelligence, and the unwavering bond between Alessia and Marcello. They had faced the storm together, and they had emerged stronger, their love and their partnership forged in the crucible of betrayal. Chapter 14. Scars of the Heart. The aftermath of the masquerade ball was a period of reckoning and rebuilding. The conspirators, exposed and disgraced, were dealt with swiftly and decisively, their fates sealed by the unforgiving code of the Mafia. Lorenzo, the most vocal and violent of the betrayers, met a particularly grim end, a stark reminder of the consequences of challenging Marcello's authority. The Ricci family, shaken but not broken, rallied around Marcello and Alessia, their loyalty solidified by the shared experience of betrayal and triumph. The failed coup had served as a crucible, forging a stronger, more unified clan, purged of its internal dissent and more resilient to external threats. Marcello, though physically unscathed, carried the emotional scars of the betrayal. He had trusted Lorenzo, had considered him a friend, a loyal lieutenant. The realization that those closest to him could be capable of such treachery left a deep wound, a lingering sense of mistrust that colored his interactions with others. Alessia, too, was affected by the events of that night. She had played a crucial role in exposing the conspiracy, using her intelligence and intuition to outwit their enemies. But she had also witnessed the brutal reality of the Mafia world, the swift and merciless justice meted out to those who dared to challenge the established order. She struggled with the moral implications of her actions, the knowledge that her choices had directly contributed to the deaths of men, even if those men were traitors and enemies. She questioned whether the ends justified the means, whether the preservation of the Ricci family was worth the price of so much bloodshed. She found solace in Marcello's arms, seeking comfort in his presence, drawing strength from their shared love and their unwavering commitment to each other. They spent hours talking, sharing their fears, their doubts, their hopes for the future. Marcello, recognizing Alessia's internal struggle, tried to reassure her, reminding her that they had acted to protect their family, to prevent a larger conflict, to preserve the fragile peace they had worked so hard to achieve. He acknowledged the moral complexities of their world, the difficult choices they were forced to make, the constant tension between survival and conscience. He also began to open up more about his own past, sharing memories of his father, his upbringing, the events that had shaped him into the man he was. He revealed his own struggles with guilt and remorse, the burden of responsibility he carried, the constant pressure to live up to his family's legacy. Alessia listened intently, her heart aching for him, her understanding of his complexities deepening with each revelation. She realized that he was not the ruthless, unfeeling monster she had initially believed him to be. He was a man of deep emotions, capable of both great cruelty and great compassion, a product of his environment, trapped in a cycle of violence he was desperately trying to break. They began to explore ways to heal, to find solace, to move forward from the trauma of the betrayal. They spent more time together, away from the pressures of the family business, seeking refuge in the simple pleasures of life. Walks in the garden, quiet evenings by the sea, shared meals, intimate conversations. They also sought ways to give back to the community, to atone for the sins of the past, to create a more positive legacy for the future. They expanded their charitable work, supporting local schools, hospitals, and orphanages, investing in programs to help the less fortunate, striving to make a difference in the lives of others. One day, while visiting a local orphanage, Alessia encountered a young girl, orphaned by a recent Mafia feud, a victim of the very violence they were trying to escape. The girl, named Sophia, reminded Alessia of herself at that age, innocent and vulnerable, caught in a world she didn't understand. Alessia felt a deep connection to Sophia, a sense of empathy and compassion that transcended her usual reserve. She began to spend time with the girl, reading to her, playing with her, offering her comfort and support. Marcelo, witnessing Alessia's connection to Sophia, saw a glimmer of hope, a possibility of healing, a way to channel their shared pain into something positive, something meaningful. He suggested that they consider adopting Sophia, giving her a home, a family, a chance at a better life. Alessia was initially hesitant, unsure if she was ready to take on such a responsibility, fearing that she would repeat the mistakes of the past, that she would fail to protect Sophia from the dangers of their world. But Marcelo reassured her, promising to be there for her, to support her, to share the burden, to create a safe and loving environment for Sophia. He convinced her that they could break the cycle of violence, that they could create a different future for their family, a future built on love, on trust, on compassion. Alessia, her heart filled with a mixture of hope and trepidation, agreed. They began the adoption process, navigating the legal hurdles, preparing their home, welcoming Sophia into their lives. The adoption of Sophia became a symbol of their transformation, a testament to their commitment to change, a tangible expression of their desire to create a better world, a world where innocence could be protected, where love could triumph over violence, where hope could flourish even in the darkest of times. It was the start of a new chapter, not just for them, but for Sophia, too. It also represented something deeper, something that had been hidden for so long. The scars of their hearts had, at last, started to heal. Chapter 15. A Flight for Freedom. The adoption of Sophia brought a new dimension of joy and purpose to Alessia and Marcelo's lives. The little girl, with her bright eyes and infectious laughter, filled the Ricci villa with a warmth and innocence that had long been absent. She became the center of their world, a constant reminder of the future they were striving to create, a future free from the violence and betrayal that had defined their past. But even as they embraced this new chapter, the shadows of their old life continued to linger. The Mafia world, with its intricate web of alliances and rivalries, its constant struggle for power and control, was not something they could easily escape. The remnants of the old guard, though weakened and dispersed, still harbored resentment towards Marcelo and his reforms. They saw Sophia as a symbol of his weakness, his deviation from tradition, his betrayal of the family's legacy. They whispered their discontent in the shadows, plotting their revenge, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. Alessia, ever vigilant, was aware of the simmering threat. She continued to monitor the movements of their enemies, analyzing their communications, searching for any sign of conspiracy. She knew that their newfound happiness was fragile, that it could be shattered at any moment by a resurgence of violence. One day, she received a cryptic message from one of her informants, warning her of an impending attack, a plot to kidnap Sophia and use her as leverage to force Marcelo to relinquish control of the family. Alessia was terrified. She immediately shared the information with Marcelo, urging him to take action, to protect Sophia, to ensure her safety. Marcelo, his face grim, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination, agreed. He knew that they couldn't stay in the villa, that it was too vulnerable, too exposed. They had to leave, to disappear, to find a safe haven where Sophia would be protected. They decided to flee, to take Sophia and escape to a remote location, a place where they could start anew, where they could live in peace, free from the constant threat of violence. They packed a few essential belongings, gathered Sophia, and slipped away under the cover of darkness, leaving behind the only life they had ever known. The journey was fraught with danger. They traveled in disguise, using false identities, avoiding major roads, constantly looking over their shoulders, fearing that they were being followed. They relied on a network of trusted contacts, individuals who had benefited from Marcello's reforms, people who believed in his vision of a different future, individuals who were willing to risk their lives to help them. They moved from place to place, staying in safe houses, hiding in remote villages, constantly on the move, never staying in one location for too long. Sophia, though initially confused and frightened by the sudden change in their circumstances, adapted with remarkable resilience. She trusted Alessia and Marcello implicitly, drawing strength from their love and their unwavering commitment to her safety. Alessia and Marcello, despite the constant stress and anxiety, found a strange sense of freedom in their flight. They were no longer bound by the constraints of the Mafia world, the expectations of their family, the weight of their legacy. They were simply a family, a mother, a father, and a daughter, striving to survive, to protect each other, to build a new life together. They spent their days exploring the countryside, playing games, reading stories, teaching Sophia about the world, sharing simple moments of joy and laughter. They discovered a beauty in simplicity, a peace in anonymity, a freedom in being unknown, unburdened by the past. But even in their remote sanctuary, they knew that they couldn't escape their past forever. The Mafia had a long reach, its tentacles extending far and wide. They knew that their enemies would never stop searching for them, that they would always be looking over their shoulders, that they would always be living with the threat of discovery. One evening, as they sat around a campfire, under a starlit sky, Sophia asked them about their past, about their life before they came to this place. Alessia and Marcello exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. They knew that they couldn't lie to Sophia, that she deserved to know the truth, at least a version of it, a version that she could understand. They told her stories of their childhood, of their families, of their lives before they met. They spoke of the challenges they had faced, the difficult choices they had made, the struggles they had endured. They didn't mention the violence, the betrayals, the bloodshed. They focused on the positive aspects, the love, the loyalty, the resilience, the hope for a better future. Sophia listened intently, her eyes wide with curiosity, her heart filled with a mixture of wonder and sadness. She understood, in her own way, that her parents had lived a difficult life, that they had sacrificed much to protect her, that they were trying to create a better world for her. She made them promise, in her most serious 5-year-old tone, that they would always be safe, always be together. It was that vow that strengthened their resolve. They had to keep that promise, no matter the cost. Chapter 16. The Harbor of Lost Souls. Their flight eventually led them to a small, isolated coastal town, a place seemingly untouched by the modern world, where time moved at a slower pace, and the rhythm of life was dictated by the ebb and flow of the tide. It was a harbor of lost souls, a refuge for those seeking anonymity, a sanctuary for those who had left their past behind. The town, nestled between rugged cliffs and a turquoise sea, was a picture of idyllic beauty. Whitewashed houses with terracotta roofs clung to the hillside, overlooking a small harbor filled with colorful fishing boats. The air was clean and fresh, scented with salt and wildflowers, a stark contrast to the polluted, tension-filled atmosphere of the city they had left behind. Alessia and Marcello, using assumed names and carefully crafted backstories, rented a small, secluded cottage on the outskirts of town. It was a simple dwelling with whitewashed walls, a stone fireplace, and a small garden overlooking the sea. It was a far cry from the lavish Ricci villa, but it felt like home, a place where they could finally breathe, relax, and be themselves. They settled into a quiet routine, blending in with the local community, living as ordinary people, far removed from the power struggles and violence of their former lives. Marcello, using his business acumen, found work as a consultant for local fishermen, helping them improve their efficiency and market their catch. Alessia, with her love of books and learning, volunteered at the small-town library, sharing her knowledge and passion with the local children. Sophia, enrolled in the local school, thrived in her new environment. She made friends easily, her infectious laughter and bright spirit endearing her to everyone she met. She blossomed under the loving care of Alessia and Marcello, her past traumas slowly fading, replaced by a sense of security and belonging. They spent their days exploring the coastline, swimming in the crystal-clear waters, hiking through the rugged hills, discovering hidden coves and secluded beaches. They rediscovered the simple pleasures of life, sharing meals together, watching sunsets, telling stories, playing games, simply being a family. But even in this idyllic setting, the past continued to cast a shadow. They were constantly vigilant, aware that their enemies might still be searching for them, that their newfound peace could be shattered at any moment. They maintained contact with their trusted network of allies, receiving occasional updates on the situation back home, learning of the ongoing power struggles within the Ricci family, the continued efforts of the old guard to regain control. One day, they received a disturbing message from one of their contacts, warning them that a group of assassins, hired by their enemies, had discovered their location and were on their way to the town. Alessia and Marcello were faced with a difficult decision. They could flee again, continue running, seeking another refuge, another hiding place. Or they could stay and fight, defend their newfound home, protect their daughter, confront their past once and for all. They discussed the options, weighing the risks and benefits, their hearts torn between the desire for peace and the need for survival. They knew that running would only postpone the inevitable, that their enemies would never stop hunting them, that they would always be looking over their shoulders, living in fear. They decided to stay. They would not run anymore. They would face their enemies, defend their home, protect their daughter, and finally put an end to the cycle of violence that had defined their lives. They prepared for the confrontation, fortifying their cottage, gathering weapons, making plans, relying on their instincts, their training, their shared experience of survival. They knew that the odds were against them, that they were outnumbered, outgunned. But they were also determined, resolute, united in their purpose. They would fight for their freedom, for their daughter, for their future. As the sun set, casting a long, ominous shadow over the peaceful town, Alessia and Marcello stood together, hand in hand, watching the horizon, waiting for their enemies to arrive. They were ready. They were no longer running. They were home, and they would defend it with their lives. This little harbor of lost souls had become their everything, and they would not surrender it. Chapter 17. Rekindled Flames. The assassins arrived under the cover of darkness, a small, heavily armed group, their movements silent and deadly. They approached the cottage stealthily, expecting to find their targets unsuspecting, vulnerable, easy prey. But Alessia and Marcello were ready. They had anticipated their arrival, prepared their defenses, and were lying in wait, their senses heightened, their bodies tense, their weapons primed. As the assassins breached the perimeter, Alessia and Marcello launched their counterattack, a coordinated assault designed to surprise, disorient, and neutralize their enemies. The night erupted in a cacophony of gunfire, shouts, and screams. The quiet peace of the coastal town was shattered, replaced by the brutal reality of the Mafia world, the violence they had sought to escape now brought to their doorstep. Marcello, with his years of experience in combat, moved with a swift, deadly efficiency, taking down the assassins one by one, his movements precise, his aim unerring. He was a force of nature, a protector, a warrior fighting for his family, for his home, for his future. Alessia, though less experienced in combat, fought with a fierce determination, her courage fueled by her love for Marcello and Sofia, her unwavering commitment to their safety. She used her intelligence, her knowledge of the terrain, her understanding of their enemies' tactics to her advantage, providing cover fire, flanking maneuvers, creating diversions. Sofia, hidden in a secret room within the cottage, listened to the sounds of the battle, her heart pounding with fear, her small body trembling. She clutched a small, worn teddy bear, a gift from Alessia, her only source of comfort in this terrifying moment. The battle raged on, a desperate struggle for survival, a clash between the forces of darkness and the flickering flame of hope. Alessia and Marcello, fighting side by side, their movements synchronized, their trust in each other absolute, managed to repel the initial assault, forcing the remaining assassins to retreat. But the fight was far from over. The assassins, regrouped and reinforced, launched a second attack, more determined, more ruthless, more desperate to complete their mission. Alessia and Marcello, wounded and exhausted, found themselves cornered, their ammunition running low, their defenses weakening. They knew that they couldn't hold out much longer, that the odds were stacked against them. Just when all hope seemed lost, a surprising turn of events unfolded. The sound of sirens pierced the night, growing louder and louder, approaching the cottage. The local police, alerted by the sounds of gunfire, had arrived on the scene. The assassins, caught off guard, their escape route blocked, found themselves trapped between the advancing police and the determined resistance of Alessia and Marcello. A fierce firefight ensued, the assassins caught in a crossfire, their numbers dwindling rapidly. In the end, they were overwhelmed, either killed or captured, their mission a complete failure. Alessia and Marcello, battered and bruised, but alive, emerged from the cottage, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, their clothes torn and bloodied. They embraced, their bodies trembling with relief, their hearts overflowing with gratitude. Sophia, hearing the silence, emerged from her hiding place, running into Alessia's arms, her small body shaking with sobs. Alessia held her tight, whispering words of comfort, reassuring her that they were safe, that the danger had passed. The police, after securing the scene and taking the surviving assassins into custody, approached Alessia and Marcello, questioning them about the events that had transpired. Marcello, using his carefully crafted false identity, explained that they had been attacked by robbers, that they had acted in self-defense, that they were innocent victims. The police, though suspicious, had no evidence to contradict his story. The assassins were carrying no identification, their weapons untraceable, their connection to the Mafia impossible to prove. Alessia and Marcello were released, their identities remaining secret, their past concealed. They had survived, against all odds, protected by their courage, their love, and a stroke of unexpected luck. As they walked away from the scene, leaving behind the shattered remnants of their battle, they knew that they had reached a turning point. They had faced their enemies, defended their home, and emerged victorious. The flames of their past, rekindled by the violence of that night, had burned away the last vestiges of their fear, their doubt, their uncertainty. They were free, truly free, to build a new life, a new future, a new legacy. The scars remained, of course, but they were now badges of honor, reminders of their strength, their resilience, and their enduring love. It was as if, after all this time, they could start living, instead of just surviving. Chapter 18. The Gathering Storm. The violent confrontation in the coastal town, though a victory for Alessia and Marcello, served as a stark reminder that they could never truly escape their past. The Mafia's reach was long, its memory unforgiving, and its thirst for revenge unquenchable. While they had managed to conceal their identities and evade immediate capture, they knew that their enemies would continue searching for them, that they would always be living with the threat of discovery. The incident also forced them to reevaluate their situation, to reconsider their options, to decide how best to protect Sophia and secure their future. They realized that hiding was no longer a viable solution, that running would only postpone the inevitable, that they needed to find a more permanent way to break free from the cycle of violence. Marcello, drawing on his connections within the legitimate business world, began to explore the possibility of seeking protection from a higher authority, a powerful entity that could shield them from the Mafia's influence. He reached out to a former associate, a high-ranking government official with a reputation for integrity and a strong commitment to fighting organized crime. He presented his case, revealing his true identity, outlining the threats he faced, and offering his cooperation in exchange for protection. The official, initially skeptical, was eventually convinced by Marcello's sincerity and the overwhelming evidence he presented. He agreed to help, offering Marcello and his family a place in a witness protection program, a new identity, a new life in a different country, far from the reach of the Mafia. It was a drastic step, a complete break from their past, a leap of faith into the unknown. But it was also the best chance they had to secure their safety, to protect Sophia, to build a future free from fear. Alessia, though initially hesitant, agreed. She knew that it was the right decision, that it was the only way to ensure their long-term survival. She was willing to sacrifice everything, her identity, her heritage, her connection to her past, for the sake of her daughter's future. They began the arduous process of preparing for their departure, gathering the necessary documents, severing ties with their remaining contacts, liquidating their assets, making arrangements for their new life. It was a bittersweet time, filled with a mixture of hope and sadness, excitement and apprehension. They were leaving behind everything they had ever known, their family, their friends, their home, their country. But they were also embracing a new beginning, a chance to start over, to build a life free from the shadows of the past. As they prepared to leave, however, they received disturbing news. The old guard, emboldened by the near success of the assassination attempt, had launched a full-scale assault on the remaining members of Marcello's faction within the Ricci family. A bloody power struggle had erupted, a violent conflict that threatened to destabilize the entire Mafia underworld. Marcello's loyal lieutenants, outnumbered and outgunned, were fighting a desperate battle for survival. Marcello was torn. He felt a responsibility to his former allies, a sense of loyalty to the men who had stood by him, who had risked their lives for him. He wanted to return, to fight alongside them, to help them defeat the old guard once and for all. But Alessia, fearing for his safety and for Sophia's future, pleaded with him to stay, to honor their commitment to their new life, to prioritize their family's well-being. It was a difficult decision, a moral dilemma that weighed heavily on Marcello's conscience. He was torn between his loyalty to his former comrades and his responsibility to his wife and daughter. After much soul-searching, he made the agonizing choice to stay, to prioritize his family's safety, to embrace the future they had chosen. He knew that returning to the conflict would be a suicide mission, that it would jeopardize everything they had worked for, that it would put Sophia at risk. He sent a message to his remaining lieutenants, expressing his regret, offering his support, and urging them to seek a peaceful resolution, to negotiate a truce, to avoid further bloodshed. He knew that his decision would be seen as a betrayal by some, that he would be branded a coward, a traitor. But he was willing to accept that burden, to sacrifice his reputation, his honor, for the sake of his family's future. He had learned, through bitter experience, that violence only begets more violence, that true strength lies in the ability to choose peace, to break the cycle of revenge, to build a better world for those he loved. The storm was gathering, but he had chosen a different path, one that hopefully led away from it. He just hoped his former allies would survive it. Chapter 19. The Heart's Reckoning. Leaving Italy was a wrenching experience, a bittersweet farewell to their homeland, their heritage, their past. Alessia and Marcello, with Sophia nestled between them, boarded a private plane under the cover of darkness, their hearts heavy with a mixture of sorrow and hope. As the plane soared into the sky, leaving behind the familiar landscape of their lives, Alessia looked at Marcello, his face etched with a mixture of determination and regret. She knew that he was still wrestling with his decision to abandon his former comrades, that he carried the weight of their fate on his shoulders. She reached out, taking his hand, her fingers intertwining with his, a silent expression of her love, her support, her unwavering belief in him. He squeezed her hand, his eyes meeting hers, a silent acknowledgement of their shared bond, their mutual commitment to their new life. They arrived in their new country, a vast, sprawling land of diverse landscapes and cultures, a place where they could blend in, disappear, start anew. They were given new identities, new documents, a new history, a carefully crafted narrative designed to protect them from their past. They settled in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, far from the bustling cities and the prying eyes of the world. They enrolled Sophia in a local school, found jobs, and began the process of adapting to their new surroundings, learning the language, the customs, the nuances of their adopted culture. It was a challenging transition, a period of adjustment filled with moments of uncertainty, anxiety, and homesickness. They missed their families, their friends, the familiar rhythms of their former lives. But they also found a sense of freedom, a release from the constant pressure, the ever-present threat of violence, the suffocating weight of their past. They were anonymous, unknown, ordinary people, free to live their lives without fear, without the burden of their legacy. They focused on building a new life for Sophia, creating a safe, loving, and nurturing environment for her to grow and thrive. They spent their days exploring their new surroundings, visiting parks, museums, and libraries, immersing themselves in the local culture. Sophia, with her resilient spirit and infectious enthusiasm, adapted quickly to her new life. She made friends easily, excelled in school, and embraced her new identity with a childlike innocence that filled Alessia and Marcello's hearts with joy. But even as they built their new life, the past continued to haunt them. Marcello struggled with nightmares, reliving the violence and betrayals of his former life, haunted by the faces of those he had lost, those he had left behind. Alessia, too, experienced moments of doubt and fear, wondering if they had made the right decision, worrying about the future, questioning whether they could ever truly escape their past. One evening, as they sat on their porch, watching Sophia play in the garden, Marcello turned to Alessia, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret. "Do you ever think about them?" he asked, his voice low and husky. "About our families, our friends, the life we left behind?" Alessia nodded, her own heart aching with a similar longing.
"Of course," she said.
"I miss them every day. I wonder how they're doing, if they're safe, if they've managed to find peace." "I feel like I abandoned them," Marcello said, his voice heavy with guilt. "Like I betrayed their trust, their loyalty." "You didn't abandon them, Marcello," Alessia said, her voice firm. "You made a difficult choice, a necessary choice, to protect your family, to protect Sophia. You did what any good father would do. But at what cost?" he asked. "How many more lives will be lost? How much more blood will be spilled?" Alessia didn't have an answer. She knew that the Mafia world was a brutal, unforgiving place, that violence and betrayal were inherent to its nature. But she also believed that change was possible, that they could create a different future for Sophia, a future free from the shadows of the past. "We can't change what happened, Marcello," she said. "But we can learn from it. We can use our experience to help others, to make a difference in the world, to create a more just and peaceful society." Marcello looked at her, his eyes searching hers, a glimmer of hope returning to his gaze. "You really believe that, don't you?" he asked. "I do," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "I believe in you, Marcello. I believe in us. And I believe that together, we can build a better future, a future worthy of Sophia, a future worthy of the sacrifices we've made." He leaned in, kissing her softly, a tender expression of his love, his gratitude, his unwavering commitment to her. They had chosen each other over a life in chains. As they held each other under the vast, starlit sky of their new homeland, they knew that their journey was far from over. They still faced challenges, uncertainties, and the lingering echoes of their past. But they also had each other, their love, their resilience, and their shared commitment to building a new life, a life filled with hope, with peace, with the promise of a brighter future. Their hearts, scarred but not broken, had finally found their reckoning, their peace, their home, in each other's arms. The only question was, would it last? Chapter 20. A legacy forged in fire. Years passed, flowing like a gentle river, smoothing the rough edges of their past, healing the wounds of betrayal and loss. Alessia and Marcello, under their assumed identities, built a life of quiet contentment, far removed from the violence and intrigue of the Mafia world. Sophia, now a vibrant young woman, blossomed into a compassionate, intelligent, and independent individual, unaware of the sacrifices her parents had made to protect her, oblivious to the dangerous world they had escaped. She excelled in her studies, pursued her passions, and dreamed of a future filled with promise and possibility. Alessia and Marcello, watching Sophia thrive, felt a sense of profound satisfaction, a quiet pride in the life they had created for her, a life free from fear, from violence, from the suffocating weight of their legacy. They had found fulfilling work, contributing to their community, making a difference in the lives of others. Marcello, using his business acumen, had established a successful consulting firm, helping small businesses grow and prosper. Alessia, with her love of learning, had become a respected teacher, inspiring young minds, sharing her knowledge and passion with her students. They had made new friends, built new relationships, integrated into their adopted culture, embracing the opportunities and freedoms their new life offered. They had found peace, contentment, and a sense of belonging in their quiet, suburban existence. But the past, like a persistent shadow, continued to linger, occasionally surfacing in unexpected ways. A news report about a mafia trial in Italy, a chance encounter with someone who vaguely resembled a former associate, a recurring nightmare that brought back the memories of violence and betrayal. One day, Sophia, now a university student studying law, came home with a question that shattered the carefully constructed facade of their new life. She had been researching organized crime for a class project, and she had stumbled upon the name Ricci, a prominent mafia family from Italy. She asked Alessia and Marcello about it, curious about their Italian heritage, wondering if they had any connection to this infamous family. Alessia and Marcello exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. They knew that they could no longer avoid the truth, that they had to tell Sophia about their past, about the sacrifices they had made, about the world they had escaped. They sat her down, and over the course of several hours, they revealed their true identities, their history with the Mafia, the violence and betrayals they had endured, the reasons they had fled Italy, the new life they had built for her. Sophia listened intently, her initial shock and disbelief gradually giving way to a mixture of awe, admiration, and a profound understanding of the sacrifices her parents had made for her. She learned about her father's struggle to reform the Ricci family, his efforts to move away from violence and embrace legitimate business practices, his ultimate decision to prioritize his family's safety over his loyalty to his former comrades. She learned about her mother's courage and intelligence, her unwavering support for Marcello, her crucial role in exposing the conspiracy against them, her determination to create a better future for her daughter. She learned about the dangers they had faced, the constant threat of discovery, the sacrifices they had made to protect her, the new life they had built for her, brick by brick, fueled by love and a fierce determination to break free from the cycle of violence. The revelation brought them closer, strengthening the bonds of family, deepening their love and appreciation for each other. Sophia, now understanding the true extent of her parents' sacrifices, felt a renewed sense of gratitude, a profound respect for their courage, their resilience, their unwavering commitment to her well-being. The truth, though painful, also brought a sense of liberation, a release from the burden of secrecy, a freedom to embrace their past, to acknowledge their heritage, to integrate their experiences into their present lives. They decided to use their knowledge and experience to make a difference, to fight against organized crime, to help others escape the clutches of the Mafia. Marcello, using his connections and expertise, began working with law enforcement agencies, providing information, consulting on cases, helping to bring down criminal organizations. Alessia, with her passion for education, became an advocate for victims of violence, sharing her story, raising awareness, working to prevent others from falling prey to the lure of the Mafia. Sophia, inspired by her parents' courage and determination, decided to pursue a career in criminal justice, dedicating her life to fighting for justice, to protecting the innocent, to creating a more just and peaceful world. Together, they forged a new legacy, a legacy not of violence and betrayal, but of courage, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to justice. They had transformed their past, turning their scars into badges of honor, their pain into purpose, their suffering into strength. The fire of their past, once a destructive force, had become a beacon of hope, illuminating the path towards a brighter future, a future where love, justice, and peace could prevail over the darkness of organized crime. They were the Ricci family, reborn, redefined, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to overcome adversity and create a better world. This was what they had fought for, what they had suffered for. This was their true legacy. Epilogue. The sun set over the tranquil waters of their adopted homeland, casting a warm, golden glow over the small family gathered on the porch of their modest home. Alessia, her hair now streaked with silver, sat beside Marcello, his once dark hair now a distinguished gray, his hand resting gently on hers. Sophia, a vibrant young woman with a law degree and a fierce determination to fight for justice, sat opposite them, her eyes shining with the idealism of youth. They were sharing stories, reminiscing about their journey, the challenges they had overcome, the sacrifices they had made, the life they had built together. Laughter mingled with the gentle sounds of the waves, a symphony of peace and contentment, a testament to the enduring power of love and resilience. "Do you ever regret it, Papa?" Sophia asked, her voice filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Leaving Italy, leaving everything behind, starting over?" Marcello looked at Alessia, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that transcended words. He squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey, their mutual commitment, their unbreakable bond. "There are moments," he admitted, his voice tinged with a hint of sadness, "when I miss the familiar sights and sounds of my homeland, the camaraderie of my former associates, the excitement of the life I once knew." He paused, his gaze shifting to Sophia, his eyes softening with paternal love. "But then I look at you," he said, "and I see the future we have created, the life we have built together, the freedom we have found, and I know that we made the right decision. I have no regrets." Alessia nodded, her own eyes filled with a similar mixture of gratitude and contentment.
"It wasn't easy," she said.
"There were times when we were scared, uncertain, when we doubted ourselves, when we almost gave up hope." She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners, a testament to the years of laughter and love they had shared. "But we had each other," she said. "And that made all the difference. We faced every challenge together. We supported each other. We drew strength from our love, and we never gave up." Sophia reached out, taking both of their hands, her fingers intertwining with theirs, a symbol of their unbreakable family bond. "I'm so proud of you both," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "You're my heroes. You taught me the meaning of courage, resilience, and the importance of fighting for what you believe in." "And you, Cara," Marcello said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are our greatest accomplishment, our legacy, the embodiment of our hopes and dreams. You are the reason we fought so hard, the reason we never gave up, the reason we are here today." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant hues of orange, purple, and gold, Alessia leaned her head on Marcello's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart, the comforting presence of the man she loved. She thought about their journey, the long and winding road they had traveled, the obstacles they had overcome, the battles they had fought, the love that had sustained them. She thought about the life they had built, the family they had created, the legacy they would leave behind. She realized that they had found their true home, not in a place, but in each other, in their shared love, in their unwavering commitment, in their unbreakable bond. They had forged a new identity, a new destiny, a new legacy, a legacy not of violence and betrayal, but of courage, resilience, and an enduring love that had conquered all. The scent of the sea, the gentle breeze, the warmth of the setting sun, all mingled together, creating a sense of peace, of contentment, of belonging. They were home. They were safe. They were loved. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The fire had forged them, tempered them, and ultimately freed them. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they knew that their journey, though marked by hardship and sacrifice, had been worth it. Every single step, because it had led them here, to this perfect, peaceful moment, to each other. The end.